I am Reverend Dr. Sharon Ellis Davis. I'm a United Church of Christ pastor, and I also serve as Adjunct Professor and Director of the Center for African American Ministries and Black Church Studies at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. I want to address what I believe the faith community should be doing to begin to prevent gender-based violence. I believe if we in the Christian community are really serious about ending gender violence, we then must take a serious look at our own doctrines, organizational structure, theology, and practices within our churches that contribute to gender oppression and violence. I'll give you a short example of that. I went a few years ago to Arkansas to attend the funeral of one of the people that I pastor. Her mother had passed. And while I was gathered into the pastor's office, when it came time to go into the worship service, I was escorted out of the pulpit and into the congregation. I was not allowed to sit with the men in the pulpit. For me, this type of practice that is rooted in a particular doctrine or theological stance that situates women as less than men and not worthy of pulpit status is not only oppressive, it is violent. This type of behavior continues to exist within our churches. We can no longer call ourselves allies against gender violence when our very theology, doctrine, and church practices lend itself to abusive practices within the church. At the very most, we are hypocritical, and at the least insensitive to how these practices contribute to gender violence. Consequently, these oppressive practices for many women were their first experience of gender violence. When we teach women that they should stay in abusive and violent relationships through quoting scriptures, such as God hates divorce, that's gender violence. When we tell women they should submit to their husbands without talking about mutual submission, that's gender violence. And when we tell women, as I experienced in this church down south, that somehow they are less than men, that is gender violence. And when we are silent about the issues of violence against women, we are co-conspirators to gender violence, even when we say we are allies against this violence. Professor Tracy West refers to this as wounds of the spirit. I think of this as a hole in the soul that is created through years and years of teaching that dehumanizes, subjugates, and silences women. This hole in the soul both victimizes and re-traumatizes women who are coming to the church seeking a relationship with Christ. There's a church hymn we sung last week at our church, Lead Me, Guide Me, where one of the stanzas says to Jesus, I am lost if you take your love from me. Gender violence perpetrated within our church walls separates women from the love of God and feeling as full participants in the household of faith. Therefore, we in the church must not only speak out against all forms of gender violence, we must do an internal critique that lends itself to understanding how many women experience and continue to experience gender violence within our churches. Michael Jackson sings, if we want to make this world a better place, take a look in the mirror and then make the change. We must have as a beginning point of our theological conversations an ethic of love that is based on equality, mutuality, and radical inclusivity. When it comes to preventing gender violence, the church must think outside of its box and act outside of the box. I pray that church pastors will join me in this effort to end gender violence in these 16 days of activism. Thank you so much.